Hey guys, NSC85. Today we're going to talk about a topic that I've been asked to talk about a number of times. Just didn't feel comfortable doing so because I didn't understand the topic well enough. And part of my hobby and what I enjoy doing is I enjoy learning. And I enjoy learning more about the AR-15 variant of rifle. And for some of you who may know, I was experiencing some issues with my upper and had to send it off. I admitted defeat and had to send it off to CIV Tactical. And what I appreciated most about that is that I was able to learn from that experience. And I'm going to share some of that experience with you, the viewer, today to possibly make you a little bit more aware of how the AR-15 operates and how it should operate. And a lot of that has to do with the buffers. Now, as you can see here, I have a number of different buffers. I have a carbine, Spikes Tactical STT1, H buffer, Spikes Tactical STT2, an H2 buffer, and an H3 buffer. So what do all those mean? What does it mean to have a carbine buffer versus an H2 buffer? A lot of times when you look on forums and other areas, usually the standard that you'll see is just get an STT2. You'll be good to go. And that may be the case. In fact, I use my STT2 in my 16-inch mid-length rifle. I use a carbine buffer in my 10.5-inch pistol/SBR build. So how do you know what buffer you need, right? That's the question you're probably asking. If I build an AR-15, how do I know which buffer I'm going to have to put into my lower? Well, the way to answer that is pretty simple. And that is to use the heaviest buffer that your particular build will shoot one round and have the bolt lock back in the open position. So you can start out with a carbine buffer and work your way up until that takes place. And what I mean by that is put a carbine buffer into your build, put one round in the magazine, load the magazine, shoot it, and if that one round goes off and the bolt locks back after that round shoots, then you're good. Move your way up. You want to do it until the bolt doesn't lock back and then go one step down. And if the bolt locks back continuously, regularly, then that's the size buffer you want to use. So let's talk about the weights of these buffers, first of all, because they do vary quite a bit. Let me move these to the side and bring up the scale here. So here we're going to start with a carbine buffer. It should be 2.9, which it is, 2.9 ounces. STT1 should be 3. Yep, right on the dot, 3 ounces. Then our H buffer, 3.8 ounces. Spikes Tactical STT2, 4.1. An H2 buffer, 4.6. And last, but definitely not least, the H3, the Beast, 5.4 ounces. So what does the weight have to do with how your rifle operates? Excellent question. The answer to that is dwell time. And what is dwell time? Dwell time is when you pull the trigger, the hammer hits the firing pin strikes the primer. The primer then ignites powder, the powder then burns and projects the bullet down the barrel, right? And as the bullet is traveling, now keep in mind this all happens very quickly. The bullet travels down the barrel, nothing's happening back here with the bolt carrier group until that bullet gets past the gas port. That is when the gas starts going up through the gas port into and down the gas tube and into the carrier. Now the gas pressure is built up by the bullet traveling down the barrel and then going past the gas port. All that pressure is building up behind the bullet, and that pressure releases once the bullet comes out of the muzzle. So basically, once that bullet leaves the muzzle end. That is when the bullet carrier group is going to be moving back. Now when you run into issues is when your system is undergassed or overgassed. Typically, most people will experience overgassing. Overgassing is caused by the size or the diameter of the gas port in the barrel. If the gas port is too large, then there is too much gas. The AR-15 only needs to operate based on 15 to 20,000 pounds per square inch of gas coming down the gas tube to operate the bullet carrier group. That goes if it's a carbine gas system, if it's a mid-length, or rifle. As long as it's 15 to 20,000 psi, your AR-15 will function. Well, you might be asking yourself, okay, but how is that made possible if the dwell time is longer on a rifle length than it would be on a carbine length? Well, that's where the size of the gas port comes in. Technically speaking, you should have a slightly larger gas port on something like a 10.5 inch barrel and a smaller gas port on something like a mid-length or rifle length. The gas port size on my mid-length is smaller than the one on my carbine length. And that's because the bullet only has this far to keep the pressure built up on my 10.5 inch build, whereas it has this far on my mid-length to keep that pressure built up. So that's why this gas port size is going to be smaller than this one. Now the issue is when the gas port diameter or size is too large. Then you get overgassing. When you fire the AR-15 and the bullet starts leaving the casing and it's heading down the barrel, that casing is expanding. And it expands and it basically mates with the chamber. I mean, that sucker that's in there. If your gas port is too big, your carrier is getting gas too fast. And more times than not, what you'll see is the extractor is just going to rip the casing. Then it doesn't eject, goes back, feeds a new round. And then that round, you'll call it, a double feed. That round will then go up against the back of the casing that wasn't ejected. Hopefully you're following me here. So how do you fix that? Well, you fix it a couple ways. The most common way is to get a heavier buffer. That is why you see people using heavy buffers, is because their gas port is too large. The entire AR-15 platform is designed to run off of a carbine buffer. This is all you should ever need for a carbine style rifle. I'm not talking rifle with a rifle buffer, I'm talking carbine with these carbine buffers. It's designed to run off a carbine buffer. Barrel makers and manufacturers will make the gas port size larger than needed to alleviate any potential issues and factors other than the diameter of the gas port. And that's why you'll always typically see heavier buffers at in-home builds and also other manufacturers. So it doesn't mean it's a bad thing if you have to use a heavy buffer. It just means that your gas port is technically too large, and you need to compensate to bring down the dwell time so that casing has time to shrink back down to be able to be extracted and ejected properly. You following me? Hopefully. Just remember, you can always rewind and look back. Alright. Now the other issue with having a gas port too large, everything is moving harder and faster. That's the other reason to use a heavier buffer, is to slow things down. But what people don't realize is that they're also getting more gas and more fouling back into the upper than if they were to have a properly sized gas port to be able to just use a carbine buffer. Now I can get into the other topic of your standard buffers, how they have weights, or something like the Spikes STT2 that uses tungsten powder. There's no moving weights in here. And then we can go into something called bolt bounce. Now the reason that this has free weights in it is that when this comes back, those weights move back, and when it moves forward from the buffer spring, then those weights go forward, hence pushing up against the carrier and then keeping it in lockup. A lot of times you'll experience bolt bounce with the powder because it doesn't have that inertia to keep that bolt moved forward. So the moral of the story is, if you build an AR-15 at home and you don't know which buffer to choose, start with a carbine buffer, because that will more times than not always work. If a carbine buffer doesn't work, then you have other issues. And that could be something as simple as your gas port being blocked by the gas block. You may have to take a look and make sure that there's no gas leaking out of your gas tube or your gas block. But if the gas port is the correct size, all you'll need is a carbine buffer. And if you feel like you're getting shook around, the recoil's too hard, or you're having double feeds or failure to extract, try going to a heavier buffer, because that'll slow down the dwell time in which the carrier is moving backwards. So hopefully this helps answer some questions. It's kind of a technical topic, so if there's anything I didn't cover, just get a hold of me on Facebook, facebook.com/NSC85, or leave a comment below. Those are my easiest ways for me to answer almost immediately. If you send me a message on YouTube, it's a little bit more difficult for me to get a hold of you. Thanks for watching. Hopefully it was helpful. Have a good night.